And there we go.
Hi everyone.
Welcome back.
It is Sunday morning in Munich. Well, it's getting on to noon actually. It's about 11:30 in Munich. My name is Kris Howard. I am an American Australian living in Munich, Germany. I work in tech and I'm a knitter. And if you've been watching this stream over the last couple months, gosh, I've been doing it for a while now, you would have seen me. Hey, Margaret! Oh, nice to see you. I wondered if anyone in Australia would still be awake in time for this.
So if you've been watching, you know that I spent the last several months working on a 4-ply sweater called Lanatus, and you can go back and see that on my previous streams, which are all on the Twitch channel, by the way. They stay there for 2 weeks, and then they get archived over to YouTube. So I will put the YouTube link in the chat. Uh-oh, echo? Hang on. Where are you getting an echo from? The only source should be from the headphones. Is it you, Margaret, or is it me? Let me just, I'll get Rod to go on and see if he can hear it downstairs. Because, yeah, I've only got one audio source on. I'll get Rod to check it too. Anyway, so that's my YouTube URL. That's where the previous streams are archived. And yeah, so I knitted that 4-ply. I hope this isn't too echoey and you can actually hear me. So after knitting that 4-ply sweater, which took forever, I am now knitting in 8-ply, which is going so much faster. I mean, I've done all this in the last week. You know, if you turned on the last one, I actually didn't do any knitting last Sunday. I was winding. I started this sweater, which is called Orkney by Marie Wallen, many years ago, about 7 years ago. And knitting it, it was way too small, I realized. And so I frogged it, and I wound it into skeins, and I bathed them, and then you saw, if you joined me last week, you would have seen me winding them into balls. And so once they got wound up, I was able to cast on. And now I'm actually quite a ways into the sweater. So I'll spread it out for you here one sec. So I'm actually, you would recall the original Orkney, the pattern for Orkney is a cardigan. And I decided I don't actually wear that many cardigans, despite the fact that I'm wearing one right now. But I'm actually, what I've decided to do is instead use the pattern, but knit a vest. Knit a sleeveless jumper to go over the top of something else. I feel like I'll get more wear out of it there. Rod says I have an echo. How do I have an echo? Where would another microphone be coming from? Not sure. Let me just see. Audio. How's that? I've turned off another microphone. Does that do anything? That one can't be on. It's not plugged in. Still same. I haven't done anything odd. Headphones. Unhide all. Oh, the iPhone. And now there's no sound at all. Okay, got it. All right, we'll get there. If you did join me last week, you know I got a new laptop. And so I had to reset up everything. And so I'm still fixing a few of the bugs. So thank you, Mr. Snook. Appreciate the technical assistance. And thank you, Margaret, for calling that out. And okay, we only lost, 5 minutes there. Let's start over. Okay, my name is Kris. I'm an American Australian. I live in Munich. And I'm a knitter. And so if you join me on any of my previous streams, I was working on a 4-ply sweater, which is finished. And now I'm working on a new sweater. And this is Orkney by Marie Wallen. And I have the Ravelry URL, which I will put in the chat, the public URL for the pattern. So it's a cardigan, and it's from a Rowan magazine. It uses 13 different colors of Rowan felted tweed, which I had bought. And I started this pattern 7 years ago as a cardigan and realized after I knitted the entire body that it was way too small. So now that it's New Year's resolution this year to actually deal with it. So I frogged it entirely, I ripped it apart, and washed all the wool. I skeined it up, I washed it, and then last week you would have seen me winding it into a ball. So you want to see how a ball winder and a swift work and hear lots of discussion about ball winders and swifts, watch last week's session. So once I had them done into balls, I can now start knitting with it. And so what I've decided to do is knit a sleeveless vest using the same Fair Isle pattern. And instead do it as a vest. So you can see I've cast it on. I've actually done corrugated ribbing. So that's this here at the bottom. And so if you know about ribbing is what's often used at the bottom of a sweater. In fact, the cardigan I'm wearing has lots of ribbing. You can see ribbing here at the base of it. Ribbing is usually used at the cuffs and waistband of a sweater because it's elastic. It's very stretchy. And ribbing is normally done in one color. If you do ribbing in more than one color, you get this, which is called corrugated ribbing. And there's a few important caveats about corrugated ribbing. The most important one is it does not stretch the way normal ribbing does. I mean, it stretches as much as normal knitting does, but it does not have the elasticity. It doesn't pull in the way that normal ribbing does. And partly that's because of the fact that it's stranded on the back. You don't get that sort of tight pulling in effect that you do on normal ribbing. So, but I love the look of it, and it's often used in the sort of traditional Fair Isle patterns. So there's a few interesting tricks you can do with it. And I made a video. I actually made a little video on YouTube earlier this week when I was knitting it and talking about corrugated ribbing. So it's on my YouTube channel, which the URL is there, and I did put it in the chat. But if you want to watch, it's a little 5-minute video about different techniques that I use for knitting corrugated ribbing and some tricks that you can use, some tips to avoid getting the little blip of color that you often get in the first row of corrugated ribbing. You know, when you start the gray color here, you can sometimes get a little blip of the camel showing into the gray. I've done a special technique to avoid that, which is basically to knit the first row of the gray. So that first row where the gray comes in is actually knitted all the way around instead of 2 knits, 2 purls. But again, if you go watch that little video on my YouTube, it will show you different ways of doing it, different ways of actually knitting it. You know, whether you do a color in each hand, do both colors in one hand, there's a few different ways. Multiple pass. So once I had the corrugated ribbing done, then it was on to the actual pattern. And this is where I actually spent quite some time doing math last week because I didn't want to use I went up a needle size. So remember, one of the problems with the sizing was my tension was off. I was getting way more stitches to the inch than the pattern specified. And I still think that this pattern has the wrong needle size specified because it's way too small to actually get that tension. So I have gone up several needle sizes now on the body. So if I think I'm using 4.5s, aren't I? Yeah, this is a 4.5 mil needle, which given that this is 8-ply wool is not ridiculous. And I measured the tension last night. I'm now getting 24 stitches over 4 inches, and the pattern tension was 25, so that's pretty good. And the fabric is actually much lighter and stretchier. You know, the original version was really quite dense. And I'm actually knitting it bigger too, because I want it to go over another thing, and I want it to be fairly oversized. So I'm not using the actual pattern instructions from Orkney really anymore. I'm using the charts. And so what I needed to do was figure out how many stitches I did want to cast on. And one of the interesting things, one of the challenges there is that the original sweater was seamed. You knitted a front, or two fronts, because it was a cardigan, remember, and then a back, and you sewed it up, which means that at the underarms, there was a seam running. And so the Fair Isle patterns were not contiguous all the way around the garment. Well, I'm knitting it in the round. It's a vest, and I don't want to sew it up, so I'm knitting it in the round on a circular needle here, as you can see. And so I want the Fair Isle patterns to fit around. The problem, though, my friends, is that they are all different. Hi, skateboards. Hi, nice to meet you. So the problem is that the Fair Isle chart, let me show you this chart, you guys, because this is nuts. So here I've got the chart on an iPad. You can see all the marking up that I've done on it. If you didn't know that knitting was highly complicated and involved a lot of math, let me enlighten you. So you see the red numbers along the side here. This is where I worked out how many stitch repeat each of these motifs are. So I've got little 4 stitch repeats, 16, 4, 6, 4, 4, 4, 6, 6, 12, 6, 10, and 6. So what I wanted to do was find a number that all of those would repeat into evenly, that would be approximately a size at my tension that would fit me. So this was some fairly complicated math here to solve this. And I realized that the problem was that 10 stitch repeat. See where the star is, the yellow star? That 10 stitch repeat was the biatch, okay? It was the real pain because it really limited the numbers that I could make all these fit into. I realized though, eventually after a lot of math, and I have bits of paper where I have scribbled, where's my scribble paper here? You know, so many scribbles of trying to figure out a number that all of these things, here it is, that all of these patterns would fit into. This is all my little math here. And eventually realized that if I changed that 10 stitch repeat into a 12, it would all fit evenly. That 336 stitches, all of these numbers would fit into evenly without having any left over. And that would be about the size that I would want it to be at my tension. So, and the good thing is that 10 stitch repeat actually is very easy to add 2 additional stitches to bump it up to 12. So that's what I've done. So I had to spend several hours figuring out the math just to figure out how many friggin' stitches to actually cast on for this thing. So once I hit that magic number, 336, I was ready to start knitting. And this wool is still making me sneezy. You know, we talked about this when I frogged it. It had been dusty from sitting there for so many years. And even though I gave it a bit of a bath, it's still giving me a little bit of congestion. So I'm just going to open the window. Just give me a second. Now, I don't normally have a wool allergy, but as I said, this wool has been reclaimed from the earlier version of the jumper, and so it's still dusty, even though I washed it, I think. And so I'm sure with another wash or two, it'll be fine. But for now, it's still making me a little congested. All right, so we're on to the actual pattern knitting. And so as you can see, I'm several motifs in, been working on this. And so we're just going to continue. The row I'm on is 3. And where's my little key? I'll show you. I also spent some time. Another thing I did prep-wise was to make this. So because it's got so many colors, it's a dozen colors. I've actually put a little sample of each color along with the symbol and the name because, I mean, this chart, look at it. It's like an eye chart, you know? And so I zoom in and I'm on the green line, I'm on the row above it. So the dot is the camel color. And the slash is watery, which is the teal color. So it's 3 teals to 1 camel. Yeah, it's not easy, this this Fair Isle stuff. And I'm doing 2 colors. I'm knitting both colors, 1 color in each hand. So I've actually got the camel coming off here on the left, and I've got the teal coming off on the right. And so I'm doing 3 stitches in teal to 1 in camel. And so I'm going to just start knitting. Now there is a logic to which color you put in which hand. And there's a theory, and I mention it in the corrugated ribbing video, but there's a theory called yarn dominance. And people have done studies of this, that if you've got 2, you're doing a design with 2 colors, like Lenatus, if you'll recall, that jumper I just finished had that Fair Isle design around the yoke. Which color you put in which hand, actually, you can actually spot the difference on the finished article. One color will pop a little bit more. And it's the color that comes from underneath the other yarn. So as you can see when I'm doing this, if I go slower, on the back side, here if I flip it, the teal yarn is on top of the camel yarn. As I'm carrying them along, the camel yarn is coming underneath the teal yarn. So it will actually pop a little bit more in the design. And since it's the accent color in this motif, that's what I actually wanted. The most important thing is to be consistent, to not switch. If I put it down overnight, I need to remember which one I'm on when I start again in the morning. And so my normal plan there is to carry the background color in my right hand, which goes on top, and the motif color goes in my left hand, which comes from underneath. And yeah, there's some excellent, if you look up yarn dominance online, then you'll see samples people have knitted that actually show why it is. And it's because the color that comes from underneath, I can't remember exactly, it's one of them has to travel a little further than the other, and so it's a little tighter, and that makes it pop out a little bit more. And so it looks better. And so on Lenatus, I always carried the white yarn in my left hand and the background teal yarn in my right hand. But obviously each of these motifs has different background colors and different foreground colors. I do have a stitch marker on here marking the start of the row. Now normally tension on Fair Isle is slightly tighter than your tension across normal knitting. If you've if you know that with a given yarn across stocking stitch in 1 color knitting you get a certain tension, you will often find if you're using that same yarn in 2 color knitting, stranded knitting like I'm doing, your tension will be slightly tighter on that. And that's because, well, you've got 2 thicknesses of yarn, and because of the way you carry the one along behind the other. You want to try when you're doing stranded knitting like this. Like you see where the camel yarn is being carried along behind each group of 3 teal yarns. I don't want that to be super tight and bunched up. I don't want it to be tight and bunching up the teal. I want the tension across it to be as close to normal, single color tension as I can get, which means as I knit, I'm kind of spreading the stitches along, I don't want it to be too tight. Let me give you an example of doing it tight here. So like I've just done the camel. So I'll do 3 teal. And then if I do the camel and I pull that one really tight, you see how much shorter that, we call those floats. That float on the back is much shorter and it's going to yank up the 3 blue together. We don't really want that, like I said, we want it to be, you want your floats to be even, not loose, not tight, but the same tension, just a nice even tension across the back. And ideally with Fair Isle, if you turn it on the inside, it looks really cool because you can see the floats, so there you can see the camel floats in the corrugated ribbing. You can see the floats across each of these. Now, There are tricks about how long a float you should have. So far on this pattern, the floats have only been maximum 4 stitches, and so that's fine. These ones here are 3 stitches, and you can see they're a little bit long. Like, you don't want to be able to necessarily get your finger caught in that. But I think once I wash it, this wool's quite felty. It'll felt together. But I'm sure that there will be patterns coming up in this motif, this chart, where I have to cross more than 4 stitches. And if you have to do more than 4, there are some techniques you can do to catch the floats on the wrong side. So I'm sure I will show you that. I actually have a video of that on my YouTube as well, which I made several years ago doing a stranded design about how to catch the floats in Fair Isle, two-handed Fair Isle knitting. But this is just so addictive. I mean, seeing the design come to life. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. It is very cold in Munich today. We have several inches of snow on the ground, and it was still snowing the last time I looked out this morning at breakfast. Good weather for working on a thick sweater. And everything's shut here, so there's really nowhere to go or anything to do. I work from home, so I left the house like twice this week, which is why I got so much done on the sweater. Like, there's nothing to do but eat, watch Netflix, work, and knit. So I caught up. I finished off the last season of What We Do in the Shadows. Hilarious, very good. I've just started watching the 2005 adaptation of Bleak House that the BBC did with Gillian Anderson. I heard it recommended, you know, if you liked Bridgerton, you might like this. But so far, I must say, 3 episodes in, there's no nudity and no doing it. So I don't know how much like Bridgerton it is. Yeah. So when I did this jumper the first time, by the way, I was working from printed charts. And these printed charts, I photocopied them, obviously, out of the Rowan magazine. This was from Rowan 42, I think. And so, I mean, look at that. This is it's so tiny. You would need a magnifying glass. And look, there again. Oh, look, I actually already did all the stupid repeats. I wish I had known that 7 years ago. I worked out the number of repeats. That would have been helpful. But yeah, it's really hard to knit from this. And so also, caveat, if you ever go to knit this pattern, there was a mistake when they printed it. And so if you go on the Rowan website and you really have to dig into the Rowan 40 to find the Rowan 42 magazine and then click on the link for addendums, they put out a PDF with corrected chart for the body. But crucially, they don't actually tell you what the error was. So I've got no idea if like one of those symbols changed out of the many hundreds of thousands. So what I'm doing now is I'm working from that PDF. So I got the PDF of the corrected chart, and that's, excuse me. And that's actually what I'm knitting from, my waistband. And yeah, I do it on the iPad because I can zoom in, and I've got those lines I had drawn on it are actually my markers for which row I'm on. And because I'm sort of making my own garment with that chart, I'm choosing where I start each motif. Which for the like 4-stitch repeats doesn't matter so much, but like for the ones with like 16 stitches, I want to make sure that they are like roughly centered, on the garment. Well, not so much centered, but I want them to not have a jog at the side seam line where each round starts and stops. So I am slightly adjusting the pattern because there's really no relationship between each motif. So I can choose to start each motif wherever I like. And so this is one of the larger motifs now that I'm doing. I think I did tweak the starting point for it. So if you are a knitter and you're interested in following along, I do knit pretty much every Sunday morning at round about this time. Sometimes I do more during the week, depending. But if you click the follow or subscribe button, you can get a notification whenever I go live. I should talk about the sweater I'm wearing today. So I am wearing a cardigan today. We have spoken before at length about my love for cables. And so if I pull my sleeve down here, you can have a look at this. So this garment is called the Blackberry cabled cardigan. And I knitted this back in 2015. This is the Blackberry Cardigan by Alexandra Charlotte Defoe. I found it on Ravelry and I think I bought it from her as a PDF. And so I can show you a picture, a better photo, so you can see what it actually looks like. So those are from my Ravelry photos of what it looks like, the front and the back. So it's a heavily cabled cardigan. I like cables. And this is one of the few times when I actually, you see, we've talked before when I wore the Noro cardigan, because it was a rainbow colored wool, it was hard to see the cables. Well, because this is knitted in a brown Zara, Filatura de Carosa Zara, which is one of my favorite yarns, the cables really pop. You know, you can really see all of the texture. And if you're going to put all that work into doing that texture, you know, you might as well be able to actually see them. So it's an interesting cardigan. I did alter it. I knitted it in one piece rather than, you know, again, these patterns, people always want you to seam them. Instead, I knitted the body on a circular needle up to the armpits, and then knit the fronts and backs separately, joined at the shoulder. Then I knitted the sleeves in the round up to the armpits and then went back and forth for the sleeve cap. And so the only seams there are where I sewed in at the top of the shoulder and then sewed in the sleeves. And then you pick up all the way around for that ginormous ribbed base and collar. Like it goes all the way around. I remember it was hundreds of stitches. And so it goes around the fronts, around the back or the waistline, and then all the way up and around the neck for that big collar. And then you use short row shaping to make the fold over. I actually wish I'd done a few more short rows to make the collar a little deeper. But that's the Blackberry cardigan. And I will, my version, I'll put the Ravelry link in the chat because it is publicly visible. So if you want to see it, that's the Blackberry cabled cardigan. And it's lovely to wear. Like it's, let me see if I can show a little more of it here. You know, the cables are super fun to knit. I love knitting cables. And I guess it's called Blackberry because you've got these sort of bubbles, which give it a lot of textural interest there. And the yarn, the Zara, I just love wearing the Zara. It's not itchy in the slightest. It's incredibly soft. It's Australian merino. You know, for people who find, look, if you're thinking that this wool I'm knitting looks itchy, I mean, you're right, which is why it's going to be in a garment that I wear over other garments. But this Zara, you can wear Zara next to your skin without any problem, I find. My husband finds normal wool quite itchy, and he has the Zara and will happily wear Zara. And yeah, I think it's a really nice match of a wool to the pattern, you know, showing off all that beautiful texture work that I'd done. And you don't lose it because it's all in that nice matte color. So I just keep scooching them around. And you'll notice I'm trying to spread those stitches out on the right needle as I go, just to keep those floats nice and loose across the back side of the work. You don't want the floats to pull in too tightly. Often if a pattern mixes plain knitting with stranded knitting, like Lenatus did, where the yoke was stranded but the body was plain, often a pattern will have you use a different size needle for the ferrule portion. Or if you saw Road to Golden, which is another one I showed off that had stranded knitting, but the sleeves were knitted plain, it actually had to use a different size needle for the stranded portions for the plain knitting because of the difference in tension. I am historically a very tight knitter. So, like I said, the needle size this calls for is redonkulous. It calls for like, where's the front page of the pattern? There it is. No, where'd it go? There it is. This calls for 2 3/4 and 3 1/4 needles. 3 1/4 needles, okay? The yarn itself calls for 3.75 to 4. How in the world would knitting 2 strands of 8-ply yarn on 3 1/4 needles give you 25 stitches to the 4-inch? Like, it's just mind-blowing. And so I'm using a 4 1/2, like way bigger than it said, and that's the only way I can get tension remotely close to what is specified in the pattern. So I still think that the needle size there, someone is, there has to be a mistake there, because it's just not possible. I do not think it's possible to get that tension. Yeah, Margaret, you've just done, well, it's been summer in Australia. My friend Margaret's on the chat, and she says she's done her list of what I did on summer vacation and put it on Twitter. So much TV. What's been your favorite, Margaret? I'm still looking for recommendations. Obviously, I caught up on The Mandalorian. I just started WandaVision this week on Disney+, the new first entry in the MCU in like a year and a half, which is very interesting. We were talking, Rod and I were sharing theories this morning on what's actually going on there, because clearly poor Wanda Maximoff, something is happening to her, Scarlet Witch. All right, so the stitch marker there coming up, that's the start of the round, and I'll get to start a new row. But yeah, I obviously watched Bridgerton over Christmas, and so yeah, The Guardian or someone published if you like Bridgerton, you'd like this. Which, look, Bridgerton was, I'm not a super fan or anything. It was amazing. It was pretty good. It had amazing costumes, and some very pretty people doing it. So, what's wrong with that? And so, yeah, someone recommended this article in The Guardian with other shows if you like Bridgerton, and Bleak House was one of those. So we're giving that a go. It's got Gillian Anderson, and, she's always good. But so far, it's very soapy in that, my husband was actually getting annoyed with it because it's overly dramatic. But it's Dickens. Dickens was the EastEnders of his day. He was a serial published for a mass audience. It is a soap opera with lots and lots of characters, none of whom, or very few, most of whom are just like, have one or two distinguishing humorous traits and are just a satire, are not necessarily fully fledged. It's not Jane Austen. We're not getting rich interior life of anyone but a couple main characters so far, if you ask me. Perhaps there's some Dickens Bleak House stan in the comments who will tell me I'm wrong. But just going by I haven't read the book. I know the book, people rate the book as one of the best, novels in the English language. So maybe I'm unfairly maligning it based on a BBC adaptation. Yeah, only the first 2 eps of WandaVision are out. So if you wait a while, you'll be able to binge it. The only thing there is it does seem like they're seeding in hints to a larger mystery. So you just, as it gets further on in the season on that, you probably want to put some Twitter block lists up if you don't want to get spoiled. The way everyone in the world spoiled me for The Mandalorian. But yeah, we re-signed up for Disney Plus so I can get The Mandalorian, which is why we were watching WandaVision. Interestingly, I've been watching the documentary series about The Mandalorian, which is fascinating, especially the technology they used to do the virtual, sets and scenes. If you're a technology nerd, basically they're using the Unity game engine. They're using VR and video game technology to create the sets and the landscapes in The Mandalorian, which is very cool. So if you haven't watched that yet and you've got Disney Plus, check it out. All right, so I'm getting to the end of the row. That's my stitch marker there. And so what I normally do is I'll go, to the last, I won't do the last stitch yet, or my stitch marker will fall out. So I'll pause there, and then I go back to my chart. All right, zoom out. So the green line is marking my progress at the moment. So I'm just gonna move it up a row. There we go. And the pink line is where I was starting most of the motifs. But as I said, because the one I'm on at the moment is a 12 stitch motif, and I didn't want it to break at the seam line, which it would have if I'd stuck to the pink line. So I drew in the blue line, which is where I'm choosing to start and stop this particular motif. All right, so I just did 1 camel, 3 teal, and now it looks like, it's slightly more complicated. So I've got, don't do that. So I'm going to do teal, camel, teal, teal, camel, camel, teal, camel, camel. So it's like a group. Oh gosh, that's confusing. I'm going to have to pay attention on this. Gonna have to pay attention. So the last stitch is a teal. All right, so we go teal. Well, let me read your comment before I get stuck into that, Margaret. Your capacity for plot is a bit scatty at the moment. Speed runs. Like video game speed runs? Oh, fun. Watch The Matrix. Watching Columbo, like the original Columbo? That's cool. Although I heard, isn't there a new Columbo? Am I getting that confused? No, I'm thinking there's a new Perry Mason, not Columbo. Oh, that's neat. Yeah. All right. Oh, okay. I think I've got to figure out how I can get it in my head so I don't screw this up. So it looks like it's... So I go 2 teal, 2 camel. Oops, don't drop a stitch. 2 teal, 2 camel. Right, it's making a sort of a snowflake. If I recall correctly, this is actually, didn't I draw this out? Maybe that will help if I looked at the one except I screwed up the drawing. But it's that one. And so it's sort of making it's kind of making like a snowflake. So ignore the top part where I screwed it up. If I look at the bottom part, that's actually what I'm doing. I'm doing the bottom part of the snowflake there, which is why it's tricky. Maybe I'll put that where I can see it. That might be helpful. Yeah. So the snowflake part is teal. So if I actually look at it in relation, so that are those 2 legs. You can see where my needle's pointing at right there. That's the 2 legs of the snowflake there. Those are the groups of 2 that I've just done. Okay. This is going to be the trickiest row. Okay, and then I do 2 more teal. And then 1, 1, 1 to finish it off. Yep, got it. Okay. I think I've worked it out. And then I come to another snowflake. So leg of snowflake, middle gap, leg of snowflake, 2 stitch spacer, 1, 1, 1. This is going to be a challenge to see if I can do this while I'm actually talking to you guys. Complicated fair isle. You know, you always have different knitting projects on the go. You know, for pub knitting, you know, you need something simple, or train knitting or plain knitting, you know, versus a complicated pattern like this that you only do at home, where you've got all your, where you can focus. So leg of snowflake, gap, leg of snowflake, leg of snowflake, gap, and then 1, 1, 1. Yeah, you got to get into the rhythm of it. Oh, thanks for the follow, Kris. Really appreciate that. And, oh, Art Money Shop. That's really cool as well. Oh, I didn't realize I was getting, oh, I'm up to 41. Wow, that's really cool. Thanks, folks. That's awesome. Thanks. Hello to the new followers. I hope you are enjoying. For those, if you've just joined, my name is Kris. I'm an American Australian. I lived in Sydney for the last 20 years. But last August, my husband and I moved to Munich, Germany in the middle of a pandemic. Well, we actually planned it before the pandemic hit. We thought 2020 will be our year to move overseas, and we'll live there for a few years, and we'll travel around Europe. And we got the ball rolling, and then, of course, COVID hit. So didn't quite work out as we planned. We managed to get in a little bit of sightseeing. Like when we got here, we went to a few places in Bavaria. We went to the Zugspitze, which is the highest mountain in Germany. Unfortunately, though, now everything is shut. And we thought, oh, during winter, we'll go to museums and stuff. All shut. We'll go to restaurants. All shut. I have a reservation at the beginning of April in Modena, Italy, for Osteria Francescana. Like, was the best restaurant in the world. We had to book it 6 months in advance, thinking we'll be able to go to Italy by then, right? It's not looking good, folks. Not looking good for the Italy trip. But I'll probably get in lots of knitting time. Leg of snowflake, leg of snowflake. This is almost like playing, you know, Guitar Hero or something. Like there's a certain, you have to be able, rhythm games. There's a pattern coming, and I need to be able to move my hands and my brain to maintain the pattern, the rhythm. You know, it's probably warding off dementia or something as well. Yay. Now you see on the other side there, so if where the row starts and stops, because that's where each motif is starting and stopping, I've got all those ends when I finish a color. And so for now, I've just been tying them into a little bow, but I'm actually thinking I will start going back and weaving them in as I go, because otherwise I'm going to finish the thing and think, yay, and I'm going to have this like ginormous task of days ahead of me to weave in all those ends. So I'm going to try and do it, you know, as I go, so it's not left all to the very end. It's such a pain when you finish a lovely knitting project and then you've got, you know, hundreds of ends to weave in. And if you're interested in how I weave in ends, did I do a video for it for Lanatas? Yeah, I think I did, didn't I? I think that's on my, is that on my YouTube page as well? Let me see. I thought I did. Weaving in ends and knitting. Yeah, I did a little 15-minute long YouTube video. It's in the knitting playlist on my YouTube, which is different ways of weaving in ends if you want to see how I did it on Lanatas. This is obviously, I mean, the trick with this is you weave it behind the cut. Like for the red, I want to make sure I'm weaving it so that the red doesn't poke through on the front in a place where it shouldn't. All right, don't get confused. Don't get confused where you are. Another camel, right. This pattern, by the way, Orkney, if you do go on the Ravelry page, make sure you click on the discussions link, because there are so many people, like, or if you look at the projects people have done and read their comments, like everyone talks about how the sizing was off, the tension was off. Something is off in this pattern. There is no way it was knitted as they've written it, because that needle size, the tension, it just doesn't seem likely with this particular yarn. And so everyone ended up sort of making adaptations to get it to fit them. I mean, this tension is a lot lighter than it was the first time I knitted it. Like, it was dense. I think I had 31 stitches. I think we said I had 31 stitches to the 4 inches instead of 25. And then this now, when I measured it last night, and we can check it again here in a sec. And obviously, look, checking it on the needle, like, it's not a great way to measure your tension. It's never, like, being on the needle is going to affect it in some way. But flip around to the other side and sort of spread out the stitches. Okay, and let's get my little needle gauge here. And so if I use that, use a little Apple pencil here, and just measure across, 1 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's about 6 stitches to the inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm counting the V's. Can I get in a little? Oh, hang on. I can change my camera, can't I? There we go. That's better. If I do that, and so you can see each stitches look like little V's. There's a stitch. And so what I'm doing is I'm just counting how many of those I get in 1 inch. I mean, obviously I should count over 4 inches, but this is just a sort of rough check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 stitches to the inch means 24 stitches over 4 inches. Let me just check up here in like the green area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6.5, which is good. Like I said, 6 stitches would give me 24. 6.5 would give me 26 stitches to the 4 inches. And you'll recall that the pattern tension, as stated, was 25 stitches and 29 rows over 3 1/4. That is just impossible. I'm using 4.5s, people. 4.5s. Like, I don't know. It just seems unlikely. Let me go back to my knitting. Should I keep it on that camera? Oh yeah, you can see a little bit more close up. I didn't realize I had it on the ultra wide angle. Oh, you can also see where I've been tearing my hands apart, just because everything here is so dry and I'm stressed and going through cabin fever. Ignore my terrible nails. Okay, 1, 1, 1. All right. Make sure I'm actually in the frame. Now, I'll go back to the other camera. That gives me a little bit more leeway on where I put my hands. Oh, drop, there we go. And this is, I think this is oh no, this is one of the Addy clicks. I wasn't sure which needle I was using. So this is one of the ones that are interchangeable circular needle. This is an Addy click. So it's got sort of a spring mechanism in there. It kind of goes in and twists and clicks. Which you recall when I was doing Lanatus, I did have that one terrible moment when it popped off in the middle of a row and I lost a whole bunch of stitches. But so far, knock on wood, we're good. Normally if I make sure they're in and just check it every now and then. It's because as you knit, sometimes, you're twisting the needle. And I think what happens is I end up twisting it and it actually comes undone. That's why those ones that, there's several brands that have a screw mechanism. And usually what they do is they give you a little tool, or you use a paper clip or something. There's a hole in the needles so you can really tighten them up. And you probably need to tighten it up periodically because they will come unscrewed in your hands as you're knitting if you're not careful. So we've talked about this, but in normal stocking stitch, I am a thrower. I'm an English style knitter, which means I hold the working yarn by choice in my right hand. And when I make a stitch, I'm doing a sort of, I'll do a stitch. So normally to make a knit stitch, it's in, around from the back to the front, pull the loop through, and then off. And since I do it with my right hand, I'm a thrower. I'm doing a sort of I'm throwing that wool around the needle. It's an exaggerated motion. It's not the best for sort of like speed. It's quite an exaggerated motion, and I actually take my hand off the needle entirely when I do it. You can get repetitive stress injury. Holding the working yarn continental style in your left hand is actually like it's better. I think it's faster. It is a much smaller movement. Look, the way I wind my yarn around my hand to do, I don't think this is, if you watch someone who's good at it, they don't hold it the way that I do in the left hand. I use my index finger to put tension on it, and you do quite a bit with that middle finger. I know other people don't do it that way. If you Google it or go on YouTube for continental knitting, you'll see other people doing it. But, as you can see, it is a much smaller movement. Technically it's faster if you're good at it. I just learned, English style. And so to me, that's what feels natural. That's much easier. And I think people generally find that. And so the only time I hold it in my left hand to do continental style is when I'm doing 2-color knitting like this, because it is so much faster than if I weren't doing that. Like, let's say you can't do that and you still want to do Fair Isle. Well, you can. You just have to drop the yarn, switch yarns between, each time you change color, you've got to drop it and pick it up and drop it and pick it up. It can be done. It's more time consuming. And you do have to be careful, because remember what I said about yarn dominance and about making sure that one color, the same color, is always being carried across the other color on the back. It means that I'm always making sure, I don't want to accidentally pick up the camel yarn like this. And you see now I'm twisting them. So if I were to make a stitch from that, I've now twisted which yarn is on top and which is on bottom. So you have to be very careful to always make sure that you're keeping, and I physically do that by putting the balls on separate sides of me. I've got these 2 colors and I've actually set them apart. So I make sure that they always stay on the same side, which helps keep them in the same orientation, the top and bottom. But honestly, if you want to do 2-color knitting, doing it, learning, forcing yourself to do it with 1 color in each hand, even though it's awkward as hell, and I'm never going to be as fast with the continental style as I am with the English style, but it's much faster than dropping the yarn every couple stitches. You just got to force yourself to do it and get better at it. I believe some rows of this pattern actually have 3 colors in them, which is a no-no technically in real traditional Fair Isle knitting. You would never have 3 colors in a row because of what I just said. It would screw up, where do you put the 3rd color? It's going to screw up the rhythm. Normally there's only ever 2 colors in a row, but sometimes you get designs that have 3, which are non-traditional. You can buy those weird things. You might see a yarn thimble sometimes you see, which is like a thing that fits over your finger and has little grooves in it and like a little bar across it to hold multiple strands of wool. I've never found that. I've seen them. I don't own one. I think I would find that more awkward than anything. 1 color in each hand is the way to go. I did that sweater, which I wore on the stream, weeks ago, the Janetta Dexter sampler sweater, which is all over done in Fair Isle. I forced myself to do one color in each hand for that. And that's honestly how you get the muscle memory for doing it, is you just have to force yourself to do it. So one of the annoying things about this pattern is that chart. When a chart is rendered with symbols like this, sometimes some of them are easy to see what they're going to look like. Like that one there, you can tell you get sort of that zigzaggy chain thing. But if I'm looking in, this section that I'm on right now, like this snowflakey thing, because of the symbols they've chosen, which one am I doing? I'm doing that there in the box. It's actually really difficult to tell what the hell that's meant to look like, which is why I actually drew it out and colored in the squares with different colors, because it's really hard for me to visually check what the thing is meant to look like and whether I'm doing it correctly. And I talk about this in, I've done a talk at several tech conferences about knitting patterns being like a programming language, but charts are an area where, by doing charts better, you allow for basically TDD. If I had a chart, if I had a colored chart for this, why don't they give me a colored chart for this in addition, or give me the option, if it's a PDF, give me the option of downloading a chart with the colors on it. It would be so much easier for me to visually check each row as I'm going, if the output is what it's expected to be. Because with just the symbols, and if I hadn't done that, I could screw it up. I could easily screw up, make one small change, and knit an entire round or several rounds before I realize that I've messed up the pattern. So I'm a big fan, I'm a big fan of charts in general, but I'm also a fan of charts. Bye, Margaret. See you later. I'm a big fan of charts that are more visually similar to the output because of that, because of the ability for error checking. And, lace and cable charts, again, if it's a good chart, the symbols will be clear and differentiated and kind of look like what they are. But with a colorwork chart like this, just having all those stupid symbols, it's incredibly difficult to tell if what you're knitting is right at any given point. Which is why my little drawing them out so I can visualize each motif is super helpful. Hang on, where am I? All right, see, because I know what it looks like, I could tell that I was about to knit the wrong thing. And remember, I'm still continually smoothing out those stitches along the right-hand needle each time as I go, because I want to make sure that the tension isn't too tight through the stranding, that the floats on the back side, you can see the floats, they're not pulling it tight. They're nice and loose across the back. And it's not pulling the fabric. You don't want the fabric to pull in, across the tension. I want it to be nice and even. Obviously, the problem with doing that corrugated ribbing down there and doing the two color is because there's purling. Like, I'm doing one color in each hand right now because I'm just doing knitting, and that's super easy. But imagine if my left hand here, I was trying to purl instead. And purling continental style is a pain. It can be done. There is a way you can do it. I've seen people do it. I cannot do it. I end up using the South American technique where you hold it around your neck to put tension on it, and sort of twang it over the needle. But yeah, corrugated ribbing. For the corrugated ribbing, what I did is I did the two in one hand. So just to show you, it is on the video on my YouTube channel, but for the corrugated ribbing, I held both colors in the one hand. I made sure I kept the one above and the one over, and then I would just use my, like, so if I was about to do the 2 pearls right now, I would move the needle to the front, I would do 2 pearls, move the needle to the back, and then just keep using my index finger to swap which yarn I was using and keeping them in the same orientation, rather than doing one color in each hand. Yeah, corrugated ribbing. I mean, corrugated ribbing is another area where actually dropping, hi Red and the Wolf Design, nice to see you again. Dropping the yarn and swapping with one hand often, I mean with corrugated ribbing a lot is something many people do it that way. Again, I did put a video recently, here I'll link it in the chat, but I did a little video on my YouTube this week of how I do, there it is. And so that's actually, I did it while I was doing the corrugated ribbing, talking about corrugated ribbing and how you do it. Red and the Wolf Design says, only knits Continental. Pearls are much more fiddly than knits. I would love to see how you do the Continental pearls. You know, did we talk about this? Did you do the around the neck? Because that's the only way that I can do them, Continental style. Luckily, with most color work in the round, you're mainly doing knits. You don't have to do pearls. There is a video on my YouTube of doing it because I did a vest for my husband several years ago where the front of the vest had a stranded pattern, but the back was plain. And so there's no way to knit that in the round because you can't carry one yarn all the way around the back to get it back around to where you needed it. So I actually did have to knit that in pieces, which meant that every other row was completely purled doing color work. And it had long floats that I had to lock in. So, oh, okay, you do them just in the hand. Interesting. I don't know that. I mean, yeah, the trick around the neck, if I do it, if I loop the camel around my neck. And so the way I would do it is if I was at the camel part now, you just kind of use your thumb to just kind of twang it over the stitch, you know? And then I just move it back out of the way to knit the knits. But that's the only way. I got taught that in a class by an Australian knitting designer called Liz Gemmell many years ago. And she claimed it was a South American technique. I don't know if it actually is, or it might be that more places do it as well. But yeah, one of the advantages of knitting in the round is limited purling for that reason. All right, coming back to the start of the row. And I think I'm going to be introducing a new color because this motif has 3 colors in it. I don't think it's got 3 colors in any given row. Okay, I'm doing the snowflake legs, snowflake leg, snowflake leg, space, 1, 1, 1. I mean, this design, look, it is a bit much, you know, 12 different colors, like normal Fair Isle. Well, I don't know, I guess some of those, like, I'm thinking of the ones that, like, you know, Edward the Seventh would wear. You know, he sort of really popularized that sort of Gulf style Fair Isle vest in like the 30s, 40s. They had a lot of colors in them. Red and the Wolf. I forget where you're from. I'll be on tonight at 8 p.m. my time, 7.5 hours from now. I can show you how to do the part. Oh, cool. All right. Let me click on you. Can I actually click on you and let me go and open that up in a new window. Can I actually, how do I get to your channel and subscribe to you? I will figure that out. I will subscribe to you. Yeah, I'm in Munich, Germany. So it is noon now. You're in the same time zone as me. You must be in Europe, Red, because it's 12:30 here. So 7.5 hours from now. Yeah, I will try and pop on if I'm not having dinner and see how you do Continental. Oh, you're in Germany as well. Yes, I'm in München, which is currently blanketed in snow. All right, I'm back to the start. So as I said, I stop one row before the last stitch just to keep my stitch marker from falling off while I go back to my pattern and figure out what I'm doing next round. Come on, Face ID. Okay. All right, so where's my blue line? All right, so I can move my green row marker up another line. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to be introducing which color is vertical line. Vertical line is ginger. That's the red color. Okay, so I need to dig the red color out. So many bits and pieces. I'm carrying this whole project in this this giant bag, which is actually from the Minnesota Knitters Guild. This crazy pink and green bag. This woman from Minnesota went to vacation in Sydney. She went on vacation in Sydney, and before she came to Sydney, she, I've only been in, Red in the Wolf says, I'm amazed you didn't learn Continental in Germany. I've only been in Germany for 4 months, Red. I'm American Australian, and we only moved in August, end of August. So I've only, I studied in Germany one summer in high school, but I learned to knit in Australia. And so, no, I did not. I have not been in Germany long enough. I didn't learn to knit in Germany. I've been knitting for a long time. Yeah, I understand here that's very much the way they knit, isn't it? Yeah, anyway, so saying I'm pulling out the red now, getting the red involved. There's the end. Okay. All right, so which color is not in this section now? Which color am I breaking off? The teal. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break off the teal. I'm going to leave a fairly, I generally leave like a 5 or 6 inch long tail. We talked about this when we talked about weaving in ends because, you want to have a decently long tail to weave in the ends. All right, teal goes away, although I did need to knit one more stitch with it, right? Yes, one more stitch with the teal. Okay, next row is, starts with 2 red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit the first 2 with the red. And so to join in a new one, the way I join in is I grab the yarn about, again, same distance of a tail that I would do, 5 or 6 inches, and I just put it around the needle and hold it and make that stitch. And again, when I do the second stitch, I don't want to pull it super tight or I'll just pull that tail right through. So I'll make the second stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop. And I'm actually going to tie the beginning of the red one and the last one of the teal one. I'm going to tie them together. I'm not yanking it tight, and I'm just going to tie them together firmly, except I pulled it too tight and the teal broke off. All right, let's address that because now my teal tail is all of an inch long. Okay, so we're going to go back. This is one of the problems with this wool is occasionally it gets thin in places. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to undo that last several inches. Look, this is great when I make a terrible mistake and you get to see how I actually fix it. Look, that's not a terrible mistake. It just means I'm going to have an extra join to weave in. I'm going to go back far enough that I've got a decent tail again. See, and by pulling it tight to show you what not to do, I actually broke the yarn. So I'm tinking now. So I'm unknitting, and we've shown this before, but the way I tink is I sort of put a little bit of tension on the tail, and that shows you where that tail is coming through. You stick your needle in that hole and then unknit it. So again, I can see there, I'm just going to put the tip of my needle in that stitch and undo it. And what I might do is that long enough? I'll go back to the group of 2 because one of the things I like to do is to actually start the new strand when there's a group of more than 1 stitch so that I can actually put the join between 2 stitches that are next to each other rather than in the middle of a float. All right, so I will do that. And so I've now got a tail. Let's chuck that in the bin and let's get my teal again. because I'm going to need to join on some teal. And I'm using, there's my tail. Yeah, some yarns, and Rowan, actually, you know, the one I had the worst trouble with this was that frickin' Brooklyn tweed. Jared Flood did a couple different yarns. And they're similar to the felted tweed. All right, see you, Red. In that they're sort of tweedy, and they, you know, they have that sort of rustic look and rustic flecky texture, and they're very gorgeous colors. And I tell you what, that damn yarn, it was the 4-ply one. It wasn't the 8-ply. I knitted something out of it, but it would just fall apart in your hands. And I think, and so now I'm going to go back and gently tie those teal ends together. I think part of it is certain dyeing techniques weaken the wool. And it might be some of these super saturated colors. Like, to get those super saturated colors, it sort of structurally damages the yarn. And so you'll find certain yarns, especially loosely spun ones. Like, this is so loosely spun, you can tell it's so hairy and loosely spun that if you pull it too tightly, it will literally fall apart in your hands. And yeah, that Brooklyn tweed... Shelter, is it? Shelter's like the thicker version. It was, yeah, the thin version of Shelter. And I was knitting a group project for a friend back in Australia. And the color I was using, which I feel like was the mustard color, it would just fall apart in your hands. And we were all complaining about it. Like, I remember having to felt it together like a lot. All right, so now I'm going to break this again. So I joined in a new bit just for like 4 inches there. Stupid. It does break really easily, this wool. All right, now we can go back to our ginger again. Okay, again, leaving a tail around the needle tip. Knit 1, and then the second stitch. Don't pull too tightly. And now, again, I'm going to tie these tails together. And this time I'm going to be really gentle so I don't break it off. Just going to do a little bow. And if you want to be doubly sure, you can, do the extra thing where you knot the bow on itself. And that's just going to keep those out of my way. Obviously, where the row starts, I've got all these tails, and that's what I said. I'm probably going to go back and start weaving them in as I go, because otherwise I'm just going to have to deal with all of that at the end of the project, which is going to be a bitch. So okay. Ready to continue. So this particular bit of the snowflake continues in cream, I think. Let me go back to my trusty pattern. So it's 2 reds, 2 cream, camel, cream, whatever. And just make sure I'm not catching the bow. Okay, 2 reds, 2 cream. Is this right? Yes. Okay, I see what it's doing. Yep. And then I go 1, 2. And I just need to do the first one and sort of get it established. So I'm doing, if you remember when I drew it out, so the red is the black ink that I did my little sketch of it. What I'm doing here, for those of you who just joined, is because the pattern for this uses symbols, and I'm doing this bit here, the blue line is my starting point. It's hard for me to tell what the hell that's actually supposed to look like. If they'd used colors, it would have been a lot easier. And so what I did is I actually drew each sort of little pattern motif out by hand, just so I could see more, and so I can see that this is a sort of a snowflake. So the dark black is the red, and the white squares are the camel. So that's actually easier for me to work from than the one with the symbols, because those symbols, not only is it tiny, I mean, getting a PDF is a massive help with something like this. If you're going to work from a chart like this, like a printed one, dear God, is that tiny. You know, you would need a magnifier. And they actually do sell magnifiers for crafters, but I'd much prefer getting a PDF version and being able to blow it up on the iPad. All right, so red, so I do 2 red, 2 cream. I'm looking at my little thing. So I'm on that 3rd row. 2 red, 2 cream, red, skip, red. And then 2, 2, 2. No. 2, 1, 2. Okay. All right, this is the other leg of the snowflake. Okay. And then I do, oh, it's a 1, 2, 3. 3 red in a row? Yes. Got it. Okay. 2 white, and then I go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2 cream, 3 red, 2 cream. You got it's tricky, these patterns. 2 cream, 3 red, 2 cream. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2 cream, 3 red, 2 cream. This is a fairly complicated chart. I mean, it's even worse if you're doing Intarsia. So Intarsia is like picture knitting, you know, where you're knitting like a cartoon character or something into a sweater. Because that every single row, there's no repeating pattern. You know, instead it's like 5 red, 4 green, 1 red, 3 green, 2 blue, 1 yellow. Like you just have to go stitch by stitch around the whole thing. Like that is a pain. This, at least if it's a repeating motif that isn't too long, you know, you can get a sense for it and you don't have to refer to the paper pattern as much. Two, 3, 2. Okay. I want to figure out how to get music to play on my stream so that I don't have to talk and we can just sit and knit together. To find a source for royalty-free music. Obviously, the advantage of this pattern and why I chose it is because of the colors. You know, it's almost like crazy patchwork. Like I would have never thought to put these patterns together. Oh, there's that 10 stitch repeat. You can actually see how I changed it there. So you see this green row. Let me switch the camera. So if you look at that green row there with the red in it. So there's sort of a 5 stitch checkerboard, and then there's a 4 stitch little diamond. And then in the original pattern, there were 2 green stitches in between. To pad it out to a 12 stitch repeat, I've added an extra stitch and I put a little red dot in the middle of it, just so it isn't a big gap, just to make the pattern, you know, just to fill in the gap. But you can see that those little stitches in between each one, boom, 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 those were the extra stitches that I added to go from a 10 stitch repeat into a 12 stitch. So yeah, if you missed the early part of the stream, I'm using this chart, but I'm not following the actual instructions for the pattern. And so I had to work out how many stitches I actually wanted to cast on to make a vest for myself. And the original garment was seamed. You know, it was you knit fronts, knit the back, and sew them all together. Well, I'm knitting this vest in the round, and I didn't want any of the patterns to cut off. So I actually had to find the lowest common multiple of 6, 12, 6, 10, 4, and 16. And the 10, that one was the 10. And you can see that little dot I put in the middle. That 10 one was the absolute pain in my ass because that was the one that wouldn't fit nicely into many numbers. I realized after much scribbling out and trying different combinations, like the original sweater I had cast on was 304 stitches. I'm now using 336 because I determined that all of these numbers, if I bumped it out to 12, would fit into 336 evenly. And plus that gives me, look, I'm using the bigger needle, so my tension is more like the pattern. 336 is similar to the amount that you would have done for the size up to the size I was knitting before. And I'm fine with that because this is meant to be something that I could wear over a collared shirt or over something else. I don't mind if it's a little big and oversized. So yeah, so I'm doing, another 32 stitches on what I originally had. But yeah, the math was considerable on this one. And so as for the actual armhole shaping and stuff, because I am going to knit this as a sleeveless vest, I've got a few different options. I could go back to the pattern and sort of follow its shaping. But its shaping for the armholes would have been for sleeves because it was a cardigan, was set in sleeves. So instead what I might do is go on Ravelry and look at 8-ply vest patterns. Or through my pattern books. I've got some pattern books I did bring to Germany with me. And find a sort of 8-ply women's vest. Find a size that has a similar stitch count to 336 and copy the way that they do the shaping, or I could wing it. I mean, it's just armholes. I could wing it, but it's always better if you can find a similar shape garment, similar numbers, and sort of crib the numbers off that so that I can get the armhole shaping. Because I feel like for a sleeveless vest, it's not just like knitting a sleeveless jumper and knitting the sleeves off. That's one way to do it, but I feel like it might actually, like when you're sewing one, you scoop out the armhole more for a vest than you do if you're actually adding in a sleeve. So I'm assuming that the armhole shaping would be slightly different for a vest versus just leaving the sleeves off a cardigan, off a jumper. The snow stop? Can you see that? If I do that, can you see how much snow is out there? No, you can't really tell. Several inches of snow. We were told, oh yeah, Munich doesn't get a lot of snow. I don't know, I think this is an unusual, I think they've had more this year than they have had in recent years. But we had snow before Christmas. It didn't really sort of stick, but it snowed last week and that has stuck around. It melted, it refroze, it snowed more. And it's actually fairly treacherous out there. I tried riding my bike to the grocery store the other day and last Monday, and was slightly scary. And it was so annoying. I got all the way, it's not that far. It's a 5-minute bike ride in the cold. But as soon as I got there, I realized I forgot my mask. I had to turn around and ride home. And I was like, you know what? I will walk. I'm going to walk because I don't have... Apparently you can get snow tires for bicycles here, slightly more knobbly tires. And I do see a fair number of people riding bicycles. But our neighborhood, is residential. It doesn't have, and especially right now with lockdown, not a lot of traffic and cars going through. So the streets they're not clear. They've been plowed and they've got grit put down, but they haven't actually melted. So it's just compacted snow and ice. And I took our recycling bins. We have bins in our building for paper and bio, but for glass and plastic, you got to take them down the street. And so I had like 3 giant bags, because we hadn't taken it out since like Christmas. So I had like so many wine bottles and plastic, with soft plastics you can put in here, all the glass, all the cans. And so I had like 3, shopping bags full. And I had to carry it like 2 blocks down to the recycling bins. And it was treacherous. And I was like, oh God, please don't let me fall. I can just imagine, what? Like all the recycling going in the air. So I was very careful. I've come close to wiping out, but I have not yet wiped out. I mean, I grew up in Indiana in the US, so I know snow, and I've grew up with snow half the year, but living in Australia for 20 years, we didn't have it. So I'm a little rusty on my snow ability, dealing with snow. We were talking this morning, like, everything's under lockdown. We can't really do anything. We were talking to my husband's parents back in Australia. And he's like, well, you could rent a car and go somewhere. And I was like, do I want to drive on the Autobahn in the snow? Would you feel safe with me like that? And my husband was like, because he doesn't drive, he's like, maybe not. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I'm sure it's clear, but still, I think I have to get a German license. I think that they will let me, because I have an Australian license. It's a reciprocal thing. I think I can get a German license. Like I think if you're here as a tourist, you can often drive in other countries on your driver's license as a tourist. But once you're there for work or residency, they usually want you to get the equivalent. I had to do that when I moved to Australia. And thankfully, a lot of nations, if they will do reciprocal arrangements where all right, you have this license in that country that equates to that license here. So I need to get a German license, actually, I think, before I can drive anywhere as it is. I did see there are some car share companies around here, but I mean, where would we go? Like you drive somewhere, none of the restaurants are open other than takeaway. None of the hotels are doing tour. Like you're not supposed to go anywhere unless you're doing exercise. So what? And it's freaking cold and snowy right now. So I don't know. Drive to somewhere and go hiking, I guess. We were just reading this morning though that like the Eibsee in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, where we went, a few months back, are in like either had an avalanche or in danger of having an avalanche. So I'm not gonna go hiking in any mountains right now. So I just stay home and I knit. It's always good every now and then to sort of stop and make sure that sense check, is the pattern lining up correctly? You don't want to knit the whole row and realize you've screwed it up. So just double check. And the way I can double check is the 3 red go over the little V of there. So that means I'm on, I'm still in sync. I haven't gotten out of sync on the pattern yet. So 2, and then here's the 3 red over the V again. And 2. Oh, at least with the window open, I stopped sneezing. New laptop's working out well. Stream, I'm not expecting, previously I had problems where the stream would break in the middle. So not only did I get a new work laptop, which has a lot more memory, our internet connection got upgraded this week, which is very nice. So the upload speed is a fair bit faster. Still not great, but it's better. And so this is first time using it, and everything seems to be going grand so far. Moving everything around. So you recall when I wound the balls, I started by winding the unknitted portion of the old balls because I reclaimed this wool from a sweater that I'd partially knitted. I pulled it apart, I washed all that wool and skeined it up and had it in skeins. And then when I wound the balls, I started with the unknit wool and then joined on the wool that had been reclaimed. So currently what's coming out of the center here is still the unknit wool. It's, you know, it's straight off the original ball. At some point we will come to a join, which is when the reclaimed wool that I recovered from the old sweater comes in. And because, you know, this pattern, you're frequently joining in pieces, it means that I'm going to have a lot of joins when I get to that point, because I'm sure that some of the lengths of color are not going to be long enough to go all the way around of a row in this, especially because my rows are now 30 stitches longer. So I am going to eventually have a lot of ends to deal with, which is why I should probably, as we discussed, start weaving in some of them now as I go, because otherwise it's going to be a giant pain. But I just thought I would at least do the corrugated ribbing and get the pattern started by using the wool that doesn't have breaks in it. There's my 3 over the V again, and then 2. So as I said before, I normally stream around this time on Sunday mornings. Actually, good grief, I've been going for an hour and a half. Yeah, I aim to start around 11 a.m. Munich time. It used to be 10. I changed it. I admit it. I was never making 10. Bumped it back to 11. Today I made it by 11:30. I should probably be more regimented with it. But yeah, usually around this time on Sundays. If you want to subscribe, you'll get a notification when I do go live. Maybe I should start doing one midweek. I just get, you know, when I'm working all day and sitting at this seat in front of my computer, I don't feel like doing more of that in the evening. It's always the scariest part of doing this kind of pattern is when you pause. You know, you pause to take a drink or to blow your nose or go to the bathroom, you come back and then you've got to like, you know, you get into a state of flow. We talk about that with programming. We talk about it with doing something. And anytime you interrupt the flow, the cognitive load of having to figure out where you were and get back into it is just really high. Which is why it's a pattern best knit at home and not, you know, I would be loath to do this at like, hey, don't slide off little stitch. I would be loath to do this at like a Stitch and Bitch or something because, you know, talking to people gets distracting. And look, I'm getting myself distracted talking to you guys. That stitch just fell off the needle. Just put it back on. It's very slippery, this wool on the Addies. is really quite slippery and it wants to just pop off. So especially when I've bunched them up for knitting, you've got to be careful that they don't just slide right off the tip, which is what happened. 2. Hang on, not 3. 2. See, that would have gotten me out of sync. Hang on, I am out of sync. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 2. Oh, I dropped a stitch. Yeah, this should be. I made a mistake in the previous row. Yes. So I have cream, cream, teal. It should have been cream, teal, cream. Guess what? We can fix that. I'm like, why does it not line up properly? It's because in the last round, I made a mistake. So this stitch here, instead of being camel, is actually meant to be teal. So I'm going to undo that one. I'm going to undo both of those stitches. So I've undone them on my needle. Is that right? Yes. Okay. And so, yes. So that one, the middle one is supposed to actually be teal, which is the color that was on the top, right? And then the teal stitch is actually supposed to be camel. And so you can look, because I'm just swapping those two, it's all right. The tension is a little stretched out there. Let me just sort of spread it along and make sure that I've actually fixed it the way that I think I've fixed it. Oh no! Hang on, what is going on here? Let me just go back. I think I've gotten out of sync somewhere. 2, 3, 2. So I'm correct up to this point. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then that should be oh my God, I made a mistake in the previous row, you guys. I totally did. Did I? Let me go back a bit. I'm going to go back a bit because I think, see, after all that, after talking about getting out of sync, I think I got out of sync. So there's the V group. So then I should have yeah, I did. I screwed up that last row. So if you look in the blue and the cream, switch the camera angle. Yeah. So the way the pattern goes, there's a V of those, and then there's the sort of 2 triangles, which are the legs of the snowflake. And then there's another V. And then I've got the 2 triangles, which are the legs of the snowflake. And then I've got a V. And now I should have snowflake, V, snowflake, V, except I don't. I get out of sync there. Mother! All right, so the question is, am I just going to go back this whole row and fix it? I bet that was where I joined in that stupid other bit of teal, wasn't it? It was. That's what happened. When I joined in that other bit of teal, I got out of sync. So look, I could try and fix each of these stitches as I come to them. It's going to mess the tension all up. It's going to look crappy. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to undo this row. I'm going to go back all the way back around to this point and fix it. God dang it. That is the challenge with this type of project. So we're just going to unknit 336 stitches. Told you it's tricky doing this type of thing when you're talking to people and you get distracted. You look down, you forget where you are, you pick up the repeat at the wrong point, and you only find out when you do the next row and things don't sync up. So, yep, it was where I joined in that ball of teal, that where the teal broke, I went back and I joined in another little bit, and clearly I picked up the pattern repeat at the wrong point at that state. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it right. That is the one good thing with knitting as opposed to, say, sewing. You can undo it, usually. And sewing is tricky. Like, you're going to redo a seam a certain number of times in sewing, but each time you do, you know, you're making more holes in the fabric. If you've cut it wrong, you may not be able to recover from that. Knitting is a lot more forgiving of going back and doing something over again to fix a mistake. Like, sometimes you can fix a mistake in situ. You know, if it had just been those 2 stitches I was swapping, that would have been fine. But because it ended up being like 25 stitches, fixing each of those in place would have been a real nightmare. I mean, I did it on the corrugated ribbing. Actually, if you go back and you watch the corrugated ribbing on my YouTube channel, one of the challenges, and corrugated ribbing is this bit, is the bit around the waistband. When you introduce the gray ribs here are purled. And so there is a thing you get sometimes with corrugated ribbing, or anytime you change colors when you're purling, or also if you're doing garter stitch, you may have seen this as well. You can get a little blip of the color the other color coming through on the right side. So I'd done the camel to start it, and then when I started the gray, I was getting a little blip of the camel coming through on the front because of the way purl stitches are. And I remembered only after I'd done the whole row that the trick to avoid that is to knit the first row of corrugated ribbing, even knit the things that you think would be purls. So rather than undo that whole row, I just, every time I came to one of those stitches, fixed it in place. And look, you can do that. It's slower than going back. I mean, even though I'm unknitting all these stitches, it will actually probably be faster to go back and then reknit this row properly than it would be to try and undo and swap around 30 stitches as I come to them. And really the tension is the bigger issue that I'm worried about, that if I do them in place, because of the floats and stuff, the tension on them won't be, it'll be all kind of higgledy-piggledy. So I'd much rather just go back and do it properly. I knew it. I should have known it was going to happen. Like, it's the danger with this. This is a complicated motif. I'm talking to you guys. I had that mistake where the yarn broke. And I buggered it up. But it's fast to knit up. Like, that's the other thing. I mean, I've done all this in a week. Like, it's so nice to be back to DK weight, to 8-ply weight, or light worsted, as they would say in America, after doing a whole jumper in 4-ply fingering weight. That Lanatus, the jumper I was knitting before, took me months because it was so much finer on so much smaller needles. Thicker wool. Like, people, often beginners want to get fast results, and thick wool on big needles, not too big. You can get like really thick wool and really thick needles. I think actually if you're not a very confident knitter, those can be really awkward to use. So if I'm teaching someone to knit, I will often steer them away from anything thicker than like an Aran weight, or maybe a 12-ply, a heavy worsted kind of weight. because anything above sort of a 5 mil needle, I find, it's easy. People are used to gripping pens and pencils. So if you get a needle size, I think that is roughly around that size, it's going to be less awkward for them in terms of just, the manual dexterity required. And those broomstick knitting needles are actually really awkward, even for experienced knitters. They're heavy, they're thick, you can't knit fast. There's a lot of strain on your wrist using a broomstick style knitting needle. So don't be tempted to go super, super, super thick. You may end up regretting it. And also, of course, really thick knitting on thick wool. If you're in a warmer climate like Australia where I was, you're limited in how often you'll be able to actually wear something that thick. This 8-ply Fair Isle, even this I wouldn't get a ton of wear out of in Australia. So I'm doing it as a vest. I'll get more wear out of it as a vest than I would as something, as a full jumper. So yeah, it's hilarious how many times people have turned into this knitting with Kris, and I'm not actually knitting. I mean, right now I'm unknitting because I stuffed up the previous row at the very end of it and didn't catch it. So I'm unknitting this row with the red, go back, finish the blue row properly, and then do the red again. But last Sunday I was winding bowls from the frogging that I had done. I think the previous episode was all frogging, right? Pretty much like it was me ripping the old sweater and taking it apart. So yeah. Oh yeah, that's right, because we were talking about Penelope from the Odyssey, Odysseus' wife, who, would weave every day and then at night would undo what she had woven because she had all these men, all these suitors who wanted to marry her, and she was waiting for her husband to get back, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. So she said she would pick one when she finished what she was weaving. And she bought herself time by undoing it every night, unraveling it. And that's a little bit what I feel like right now. So, I mean, obviously I could pull the needle out and undo this row, but the time it would take me to get all those needles back on, get all those stitches back on the needle to make sure I hadn't dropped any, like it's too dangerous. You really only do that if you're like frogging the whole thing back quite a ways. Then you can do that, but because I'm only going back one row, I'm tinking. Slipping the needle out, that's your nuclear option. And, it's going to take you a long time, it takes a long time to get the stitches back on the needle, to get them the right orientation, to make sure you haven't dropped any. It introduces a lot of risk. And so I generally avoid it if I can. Like, let's say I made a serious error on the pattern, or I decided that, this tension of the body was wrong, and I needed to rip it back to the corrugated ribbing. I might do it then. I might pull the needle out and frog it then if I had to go back that length. Or if it were more than one row, anything more than one row, you start weighing up whether the time of getting the stitches back on the needles will be worth it or not. You can do tricks. So often, one thing people talk about, especially when you're doing lace, is putting in a safety line. And because if you screw up lace, it's really difficult to fix. You know, you really have to frog it back to a certain point, to a safe point. It's like a save point in a video game, you know? You actually want to put in like a save point. And so the way you do that is you actually, as you're knitting a row, you hold a piece of thread, like sewing thread. You run it through the stitches. So you can do it by actually just like let's say if I wanted to put in a safety line right now, I could actually just get a needle and thread and weave it through all the stitches all the way around the whole thing. And so it's just there so that when I then take out the needle and frog it, it will frog it back to that point, but then the stitches will not unravel any further because of the safety line. One of the cool things around some of the interchangeable needles these days, like I was talking about the Knit Pro, which are the ones that have a screw mechanism, they have a little hole near the base of the needle, which is where you can insert a safety pin or a tool to tighten it, to get yourself a little more grip for tightening. And what you can do actually is you can thread your sewing thread through that hole and then automatically drag a safety line through. You can actually just do that, tie it off, and then knit around, and it will drag that safety line through as you go. So that's really handy if you're knitting lace. I did not do a safety line for this. I mean, it would be one. I mean, I could do a safety line each motif, you know, or every so many rows I could put in a safety line just in case I do have an epic screw up and I need to rip it back to that point. It won't unravel any further than that. With these needles, I mean, one thing I've tried in the past is to actually use a little sticky tape, because I don't have a hole on these needles. Sticky tape, use some, Scotch tape to tape a sewing thread to it. But it often, the stickiness kind of catches on the yarn and stuff like that, so it's not ideal. And then, of course, after you finish the garment, you just pull the safety line out. Like, it doesn't stay in forever. But yeah, if you're doing lace, 100% use safety lines. Or I would say even with really complicated cables like this one, I should show this again. I showed it at the beginning of the stream, but if anybody wasn't on at the beginning, the sweater I'm wearing right now, the cardigan, is the Blackberry cabled cardigan. And that's what it looks like. So it's a very textural garment. And so that's one where, yeah, I could have, those complicated cable motifs going up, I could have done a safety line after each one in case I screwed it up and needed to frog it back. And that's knitted out of I did this pattern back in 2015. It's available on Ravelry. I'll put the Ravelry link. I made the project public, so if you want to see, because I did make a few changes. I knitted it in the round up to the armpits, so just put the link in the chat. But yeah, this is Filatura de Crosa Zara, which is like probably my favorite knitting yarn. It's merino. It's very smoothly spun. It's not itchy. It's machine washable, but it's still like super soft. I mean, I'm very careful when I machine wash it, but yeah, I'm a big fan of the Zara. Doesn't fall apart in your hands. All right, Red, nice to see you. Thanks for joining for a while. Hopefully I'll pop on tonight and I'll see you can demonstrate your continental knitting for me. If I'm available, I will. Doesn't fall apart in your hands like this crap, which is why I got into the problem with this row in the first place, you'll recall. So, almost back around to the beginning. So yeah, if you just joined, your eyes are not deceiving you. I am actually unknitting at the moment because I made a mistake in the previous round. And so my pattern wasn't lining up and I didn't catch it, even though I told you all repeatedly how to avoid doing that. But I cleverly made a mistake so I can show you the consequences of that. And it was actually like 20 or 30 stitches And so you know what? I'm just going back. I'm just going to unknit the round and reknit it. It's probably the most critical rows for each of these pattern motifs is the first couple rounds, because it, you know, as I said, if you can't tell from the chart what it's meant to look like, you got to make sure those first few rounds are set up correctly. Or else your snowflake ain't going to be a snowflake. So I'm tinking. Tinking is knitting spelled backwards. And we like stupid jokes. And tinking is unknitting. It's knitting backwards. So I'm actually going backwards, backwards, backwards. And the way I tink, let me change the camera here. So the way I tink is, I'm going from the right needle onto the left. So see, the next stitch is this camel stitch. I'm going to hold the thread, the working yarn up with my finger, and you can see where it's coming through. It's coming through this hole here. So I'm just going to put my left needle tip in the hole where the yarn's coming through, right? And then slide it off the needle, and then boop, it comes undone. So the next one is the red. So again, I use the red. Use my finger to put some tension on it so I can see the hole where it's coming through. So it's coming through that blue stitch there. Put my needle tip in there and then just slide it off the needle. So I'm just doing that with each stitch, and that's tinking. You just always look to see where the working yarn is coming from and follow it with the tip of your left needle. So there's the hole. Just keep scooching. Okay, back to the beginning. So you see we're almost at the end of the red. So the red's going to go bye-bye again, briefly, until I sort out what happened at the end of the teal and the cream. And then we can reintroduce red for the third time. Third time lucky on this freaking round. Yes, this will be 3 times to get the transition to the red actually working, because so the first time the teal broke when I was knotting the ends together, and so because the yarn fell apart in my hands, I had to unknit it about 6 inches, and then when I reknitted it, that's when I screwed up the pattern. And I didn't detect it. I should have stopped at the end of the round and made sure that it was correct before I knit it all the way. Stitch by stitch, we go backwards to the beginning. Okay, the pink stitch marker is the end of the round. So that's when the red will go away. Okay, stitch marker moves from needle to needle. All right, so I tied a little, let me go back to my other camera angle. So I tied a bow to join the red and the teal together, you recall, when I joined it in. So I'm just going to undo that bow. Okay, so red, come on red. This wool is kind of sticky on it. So okay, red is undone. All right, so now I'm going to keep unknitting with the teal back to where I joined in that piece, because clearly that's where the mistake happened. So I go backwards a bit. And Mr. Camel, where are you? There you are. I'm sure that's where the pattern got off, was where I joined that in. And that was here. So let's just double check. All right. So boom, boom, boom. That's the V. Then I've got snowflake. Hang on. I got 2 V's in a row. That's where the mistake was. Is it? Hang on. Let me go back a ways further. V. Snowflake legs. V. Snowflake legs. V. Snowflake legs. V. Snowflake legs. Ah, no, that's where it screwed up. I gotta go all the way back to there. Let me grab another stitch marker and mark that. Because, wow, I actually made the mistake earlier. It wasn't related to breaking the yarn. So I'm just going to use one of the, actually I should use a different color, because if I use the pink again, I use a different color to mark it. I'll use the yellow. That's why it's good to have stitch markers in different colors. So V, snowflake legs, V. Yep, that's, let's go back to there. That's where it occurred. Wow, it happened way earlier than I thought it did. All right, and that's where we joined the break in the teal yarn. So I'll just leave it for now. It doesn't hurt anything to leave it there as a bow. Oh gosh, yes, I stuffed that up. So I'll get this fixed and get the red row started, and then I will go and stop for the day and go have some lunch. So I've been going for a good 2 hours now. And last 20 minutes of that have been fruitless because of the error that I made. Happens. Knitting teaches patience. And if the pattern chart had colors, maybe I would have recognized that it wasn't looking correct earlier. Okay, and back around to the marker where the error, I think, started. And that's, look, that's about as much. Yeah, that's probably where we hit the error last time. Let's just double check. V, snowflake legs, V, snowflake legs, V, snowflake legs, V. All right. Ready to start snowflake legs again. And I was carrying teal in my right hand and cream in my left. This is where it's important to be consistent. And I can tell because the camel's being carried under the teal. All right, so it's snowflake leg time. So that was 2, 1, 2, and then 2 stitch break, and then the V. 1, 1, 1. Okay. 2 stitch break, snowflake legs, break, V. I wonder if I went back and watched the stream if I could see where I made that error and what caused it, because Yeah, if I was talking to you guys, if I got distracted. Okay, now I'm going to undo that join just so I can redo it. Just unpick my bow. There we go. So it's a bit like on The Amazing Race, you know, when someone's counting something and they count it wrong and you're just like, oh, wince. Like, I wonder if, you know, hey, why didn't any of you spot it? You could have totally called it out as I made the mistake, you know. Obviously, none of you caught it either. Teal, and then the snowflake legs. Come on. Get in my hand. Spacer. 1, and that's, join in the new one yet? V. Spacer. Yep, and that's when I join in the new teal for like 5 stitches. Bloody hell. Snowflake leg. So many ends. I think, you know, before I go any further on the motif, I'm going to have to go back and start weaving in ends. Otherwise, it's just becoming, it's going to be a nightmare to do it later. Okay. So this is snowflake legs. And then the V. So the last stitch will be a teal. Right. So let's just, before I do the next row, let's just check. Let's just go back a bit further around and check that I haven't stuffed it up. So we got snowflake legs, V. Snowflake legs, V. Snowflake legs, V. And so when I'm saying snowflake legs, I'm referring to this group of like 2 triangles, which is, if you look on my little chart, those bits that stick down there at the end. So it's snowflake legs, and then if you imagine this wraps around continuously, those 3 white stitches make the V. So snowflake legs, V, 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 snowflake legs, and then ended with a V. Whoo! We fixed it. So the last stitch is a teal. And then, you'll recall, I rejoined the red for the 3rd time. Where's the end of the red? What I need to do is wind it up because I undid it and I've just got a giant pile of tangle of wool here on my desk. So let's just wind this up a little bit. And try and not create a giant tangle. I've created a giant tangle. There's the tail. Okay, there's the red. All right, and then, so we've just joined. I've just spent the last half hour fixing a mistake that I made on the previous row, which I didn't figure out until I got all the way to the end of the next row. And so I had to unknit all that, unravel it, and now we're ready for the 3rd time to join in the red and hopefully get the next row going. All right, so the next row starts with 2 red stitches. So again, I'll just put my needle tip in. I will loop the wool around the needle tip, make 1 stitch, separate the tail out, make the second stitch. And then I'm going to stop and I'm going to tie the red tail, the short one there, the tail, onto the teal tail, which I can break that off a little bit shorter. And I'm going to be very careful doing this because when that teal broke was where everything went off the rails today. Except it didn't really. I had made the mistake before that, but I didn't catch it. All right, so those are knotted and out of the way. Just a little bow for now, and then later I'll go back and weave those ends in. All right, so 2 red. Get my cream organized amongst all these tails. Yeah, the cream goes underneath. Okay, cool. And I'm doing 1 color in each hand. All right, 2 red, 2 cream. Okay, and now remember the rhythm of this row. So the rhythm of this row is alternating for 3 reds, red, white, red, and then 2 cream, 3 reds over the V, 1, 2, which is how I knew I was wrong last time, and then 2 creams again. And that gets us back to the snowflake legs. So that's is this a 12 stitch? This is a 12 stitch repeat. And obviously most humans do better with groups of sort of, multiples of 4 or something. So that's why I'm breaking it into 2 parts. So there's the alternating for 3 reds. So 1, 2, 3 over the snowflake. And then it's 2 cream, 3 red, and 2 cream over the V. Yep, cool. Then back to the alternating 1, 2, 3, and then 2, 3, 2. All right, we fixed the error. I've got this row back on track. I think I'm going to call it there because it's 11:30. It's what? No, it's 1:40 here, and I haven't had any lunch. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go have some lunch. I saw Red and the Wolf Design is going to be streaming tonight, so I might join that stream if I'm available. Otherwise, look for me at the very least next Sunday. So if you subscribe, you'll see I stream every Sunday morning Munich time. I might do it during the week, might not, depends on how tired I am of sitting in front of computers. But hopefully by next Sunday, you will see quite a bit more progress on Orkney. So thanks for joining me today. Feel free to subscribe. You can check out my YouTube page, follow me on Twitter. Thanks for joining me. It's been really fun. See you later.